Hey, Luttrell. Man, what's this intro music we got this morning? I feel like I'm sort of in a singles bar on the dark side of the moon waiting for a Venetian chick to wander in, and she'll say, "Do you come here often?" And I'll like, "What?" Welcome, everybody. Law and Legitimacy. I've got PTSD this morning. I hate to admit it. Post-traumatic stress syndrome. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm here for some hearings related to the Biggs post-trial proceedings. And also on Friday, Owen Schroyer of InfoWars will enter a guilty plea to some misdemeanor charges related to January 6th. So it's J6 time again. But, I'm driving, you're not driving, I'm on the train down here. I get in last night around 7:45. I get out of the station and I look around and I'm like, I'm back. It's like I thought I escaped the swamp. The swamp has returned to, or I have returned to the swamp. What about Hunter Biden, huh? Oh, to be a president's son. The contours of a plea deal have been released to the press, and apparently it's true. Sleepy Joe's boy, Hunter, is going to enter into some misdemeanor tax charge counts. He failed to file returns for a couple of years. He's made good on the back taxes he owed. More about that in a moment. But the eye-catching one to me is he's being offered, apparently, something called pretrial diversion on his illegal possession of a firearm charge. This is federal court, and maybe this might be a reflection of a Northeasterner. I practice primarily in Connecticut, and guns are a big deal in Connecticut, and no person, I'm unaware of anybody in a Connecticut gun case getting pretrial diversion from the feds. And pretrial diversion in general is almost never given. What are we talking about? So the criminal justice system, like everything else in the law, is adversarial. When you go to a lawyer's office and you see all those books, those are reported cases. It's the United States versus Hunter Biden, Mike Boyer versus Norm Pattis. It takes a case or controversy to make a lawsuit. It takes a decided case, a decision from a judge to have a reported decision. It takes appellate courts to override or overrule judges to make appellate law. And it takes the United States Supreme Court to say to everybody, sit down and shut up. This is how we're going to do it in these particular cases. And so it's a conflict-driven system. And it's an adversarial system where we say that the test of wills, the battle of intellects, the courtroom struggle is the best way we have of determining what the truth is in murky circumstances. And very few things can be as murky as a case in court. You may say this is a slam dunk case. Who could lose? Who could win? Walk into a courtroom and you'll realize that questions of fact, are draped in theory, are draped in perception, are draped in theories of mind, are draped in our settled expectations and consensus about what is and isn't reasonable. A courtroom, ladies and gentlemen, is a terrifying place. But if you're a lawyer, it's also fun. It's one of the most creative environments I can imagine, and I call it existential painting. Of course, the colors are the blood of others, and the brush you wield, some distance removed from the blood. And so enough morbidity. So when the United States and a private citizen square off, most cases are resolved by way of a plea bargain. That is, the parties calculate what the risks of success are, what their interests in going forward are, and they come up with a resolution that satisfies both of them well enough for the case at hand. The government is almost always looking for a guilty plea, and they very rarely will accept anything less. A pretrial diversion is a program that must be approved by the federal government, by a senior prosecutor over a line prosecutor. And it says, in this case, we'll settle for something less than a guilty plea. We will let the person off the hook, as it were, and we will say to this person, if you can satisfy a number of conditions, we won't insist on a conviction here. But the barriers to entry into pretrial diversion are enormous. And you have to have some extraordinarily some extraordinary good cause, or in this case, good connection to get it. I think of a case, the only one occasion in my entire career of 30 some years in which I got a pretrial diversion program I had to sweat blood to get. And it was a case of a man who, in the context of a condominium association fight, he was a board member on the condo board, called another board member. He was on a business trip in Texas. He called into Connecticut and he said on the phone, "You better keep one eye open when you sleep at night and keep that on that pretty little ass of your daughter." And, the guy regarded as threatening, and obviously it was, in some it was menacing. He called the feds. They traced the phone to the man in Texas, and now he's being charged with use of a computer in interstate commerce to threaten another person. And they wanted a felony conviction, the feds, for the guy. And I'm like, to the feds, he had a bad night. Give it a break. Give it a rest. If you convict him of a felony, he's going to be deported. I think it was to Guyana. He had children in the United States who were born here and were citizens. I said, this will be catastrophic for his family. The feds said, and I said, how about pretrial diversion? No. We're not, this was terrible behavior. No pretrial diversion, the prosecutor said. And so I said, look, I don't mean to be insulting. I'm going over your head. So I went to her boss. Well, I don't think we can do that. So I went over his head. And the next thing you know, they granted pretrial diversion to this fellow. He was able to satisfy some conditions of probation. He was left without a felony record, and he remained in the United States. But Hunter Biden, a gun, a drug user, a tax deadbeat, and they're basically holding the door open for him to walk away from these federal offenses. I think it stinks. And I do stand with those who talk about a two-tier system of justice. Change the skin color to black and change the last name to Holmes instead of Biden, where he's got no father in the White House. And this guy's going to jail. He's taking a taste. He's not getting pretrial diversion. So the deal will have to be approved by a federal judge. And I suspect that there's a significant outrage factor across the country here. And Hunter is unlikely in the end. I'll make a prediction here. I think in the end, he's unlikely to satisfactorily get pretrial diversion. Yeah. What's more, watch this question, Mike. In federal court, there's something called relevant offense conduct. Federal sentencing, you never in plea bargaining in state systems, you usually make an agreement with the prosecutor. I'll plead guilty to X and I'll do Y years. And if the judge doesn't approve it, you withdraw the plea. In federal court, you purchase blind. You say, I'll enter these pleas, and the judge will do what the judge thinks is just. And there's no telling, no guaranteeing what the judge will do. The concept of relevant offense conduct could play a very large role in Hunter Biden's sentence for the following reason. He didn't file tax returns for a couple of years and had a tax liability to the United States government of 1.5 or 2 million, somewhere in that range. How did he pay that tax liability? Because he got one of his lawyers lent him the money. I mean, it's unethical to loan a client money in a case in which you're representing the client. Now, it may be that this is a lawyer from another event or another episode in Hunter's life. But, how is it a lawyer decides to lend his client a couple $1 million? Where did that money come from? And is that money related at all to what the whistleblower has been telling us about money that was given to Joe Biden when he was vice president from a foreign power? Are these Ukrainian dollars that are finding their way into one of Hunter Biden's lawyer's account so that Hunter Biden can pay his tax bill? I mean, I'd like to know. And so the concept of relevant offense conduct permits a judge to consider all sorts of things in imposing a sentence. Another story happens to be true. Many years ago, a client of ours was accused of conspiracy to commit murder while engaged in drug trafficking. A drug deal went bad on the street one night. Somebody was shot dead. And my client was accused of conspiring with the killers. We got at a trial an acquittal on the conspiracy to commit murder charges, but everybody was involved in a drug transaction, so the client was convicted on drugs. The judge considered the murder in his sentencing and imposed the statutory maximum on the client. And we're like, how can you do that? The jury said not guilty. Well, you find relevant offense conduct by something less than the law's highest standard, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And the case law says that even acquitted offense conduct is relevant offense conduct at the time of sentencing. We were so outraged by it, we took an appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, and they said, yeah, that's right. And the United States Supreme Court upheld that. So Hunter, the money, where the money came from, why his lawyer's lending him his money, where the lawyer got the money, what the conditions and terms are for repayment, who's guaranteed repayment. All of this is now an open question in Hunter's federal plea. And so the answers that we haven't gotten from the whistleblower in the congressional hearings, because James Comey and company stonewalled the Congress and wouldn't respond, at least publicly, to Congress's subpoena, are now going to be front and center in the Hunter Biden sentencing. And my sense is all eyes should be on this sentencing. The relevant offense conduct, where'd the money come from, who put it in the lawyer's account, what are the promises that were made in exchange for its repayment, and the related question, how is it that this privileged middle-aged white guy ends up with a deal that no young black kid can get, or you or I, Mike, or just about anybody else in the country couldn't get, where he gets pretrial diversion on a gun charge? It just stinks to high heaven, and the timing couldn't be worse for the Justice Department. John Turley from, the professor, wrote a column the other day that insofar as Merrick Garland took the reins of the Justice Department and promised transparency to restore confidence in the Justice Department, he has failed and failed utterly. I thought that was sort of a harsh assessment, but when I look at the Hunter Biden thing, I think it's absolutely true. The Justice Department looks like a house of mirrors right now. It looks like a fun house with the nuts in charge, and they continue to gratuitously prosecute J6 people, continuing to arrest people almost 2.5 years after, not almost, 2.5 years after the event, in some sort of glorious jihad to say never, never again. But yet the president's son walks away from a gun charge and gets a sweetheart deal on tax evasion, while the rest of us go to prison, and Donald Trump gets charged, who just happens to be running against Uncle Joe for the presidency. Somebody needs to get Merrick Garland on the stand in the weaponization committee and say, Merrick, are you still pouting over the fact that you didn't get that seat on the United States Supreme Court justice? Maybe it's time to put Merrick on the hot seat for a while and ask, what the hell's going on in the Justice Department? Whose vision of America are you trying to support here?
Over on Rumble, BTL says Norm is on fire today. So much good information. I can't agree more. This is where you shine, Norm, your experience. And I've got this article on the screen that we'll get to in just a moment. But what's interesting to me is that you and I did not discuss the substance of the article I have on the screen. I think I may have just sent you the link and said, I like this angle. And what is contained within that is the attorney for one Kodak Black, who has just spent 46 months in prison on gun charges similar in nature to those that to the one that Hunter Biden is now looking at a pretrial diversion in this plea deal for. And he says much of the same thing, Norm, that after 26 years in the practice, he's never had a single client ever be offered non-jail time in a case that involves a felony gun charge like this.
No, it just doesn't. It really doesn't. I can't think of one. And rapper Kodak Black or Kodak Black. I don't know where his lawyer practices. I wonder, whether New England is different than the rest of the country, because New England is radioactive to guns. It's not like Idaho where you're expected to carry one. Okay, well, so that's another East Coast thing. But I would be interested, if you're out and about today in the world and you have a friend who practices criminal law, ask everybody you know in the criminal justice system, when is the last time a felon in possession of a gun got pretrial diversion? And you may find out it was Hunter Biden. He may be the first. So it stinks. It fills me with a sense of disgust as to Merrick Garland and the Justice Department, and to Joe Biden as well. Whether it sticks to him or not, I have no idea.
Well, so severe conservative. I put this question on the screen because I think it's a good one. Does Biden remain convicted after the diversion?
No, that's the beauty of the pretrial diversion. So, pretrial diversion, trial by verdict, guilty, verdict. Plea, guilty, verdict. Pretrial diversion, probation, no verdict, no conviction. It's a wash. You walk away. That and pretrial diversion programs are generally they're on the theory that the law recognizes that everybody can have a bad day. Maybe you made a horrible mistake that's out of character, and the social consequences aren't that high. Justice is best served in these instances by avoiding a conviction. Hard to make that case as to Hunter Joe Biden unless you're Joe Biden. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's kid, unless you're Joe Biden and unless you control the Justice Department. And, I don't really believe that he controls the Justice Department. The moment after I said that, I thought, you sound like a nutty conspiracy theorist, but it is Biden's Justice Department.
Indeed. Indeed.
And I think the appearance of this, stinks. And Merrick Garland should be ashamed of himself. So,
well, look, I mean, this is again, it is Biden's DOJ, the same way that Jeff Sessions and then Bill Barr were the head of Trump's DOJ, and that was a label that stuck throughout his presidency. No matter who was in that position, that was something that was tied inextricably to Trump. Severe conservative says the quote continuing investigation unquote limits GOP House investigating this. Correct?
I don't understand the question. So I don't mean I
think severe. If I can go out on a limb here, I think just to clarify, this is the nature of this being an ongoing investigation limits the House committee from being able to further into this information.
Arguably, it does. I mean, so when there is an ongoing investigation, the law recognizes a privilege, that is a right to refuse to answer questions about ongoing investigations, because after all, an ongoing investigation is, as the term says, ongoing. And you don't want to tip off the party being investigated about where you're going. You don't want necessarily to reveal who your witnesses are. You don't necessarily want to shed light on your sources and methods. Once an investigation is over, that privilege evaporates. We talked about this with respect, I believe, to the Gabby Petito case, or I actually was on somebody else interviewed me about this with respect to the Gabby Petito case, where local prosecutors are refusing to turn over information to the family, claiming there's an ongoing investigation that the feds are conducting, and the feds said no, there's not, and local law enforcement still is refusing to turn over information. Somebody got caught lying.
Just want to take an opportunity here, Norm, before we transition, because I rarely get the opportunity to do so, but I want to point out the irony of this article and really the fact that the Democrat Party still owns the black vote by and large in this country. It's really interesting to me that the Biden administration and all of the appointments that this administration has made throughout the federal government has been very anti-Second Amendment, very hostile to Second Amendment rights. And we've seen this since the day that he has walked into office. It is not lost on me that one is going to necessarily make every effort to take care of their own, right? That is the point of nepotism. And we can look at this situation and very easily say, okay, yeah, this is nepotism in real time, right? This is no different from Biden flexing his muscle to get Hunter into some sort of private school, even after he got expelled from the previous one, right? Nothing saying that Hunter Biden has ever been on a level playing field. First and foremost, how are you all at the same time as you're getting, as you're losing a laptop, you lose a firearm, you're addicted to crack, you're getting paid by a Ukrainian energy company 80 G's a month when you have no subject matter expertise, you have no experience whatsoever. This guy was never playing by the rules to begin with. But the one thing that we can all agree on is the fact that this administration has been entirely hostile to the Second Amendment and has been pushing from day one stricter gun laws and better regulatory structures and, background checks and common sense gun regulation, X, Y, and Z. And at the first opportunity to do something upon which that platform could stand in a meaningful way, because this is a charge involved with lying on an application for a firearm, the same way that Kodak Black does. What does the Justice Department do? What does the DOJ do on behalf of Hunter Biden? They offer him pretrial diversion, no jail time, nothing, for lying to get a firearm, getting a firearm, and he also lost the firearm. The facts here are crazy as shit when you really put them into context. With respect to Kodak Black, it's interesting to me because we saw during the last election cycle there were certain Black prominent actors and comedians and musicians who came out in support of Trump, right? Ye being one of them. And it's funny to me that if the conservative countercultural movement would take a second and stop being so square, they would recognize that rap is in the domain of conservative politics. Free speech, Second Amendment, the right to privacy, due process, all of these things, that is the domain of rap. And I was swinging a kettlebell to Kodak Black's music last night. So when I saw this morning, it just rained on me that this guy has an opportunity through his attorney and on his own platform, not to say that he's as well-versed as we would want him to be, but conservatives need to wake up. There is an entire voting bloc that feels the same as you do. You're just too square to recognize it. Stop being so binary.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point, and it's worth bearing. So keep an eye on the Hunter Biden story. I predict that there'll be enough of a public backlash on this that the judge is going to be hard pressed to accept the deal, and that Hunter had, when you enter a guilty plea in federal court, you don't get to take it back if you don't like the results. And so if you see, we're often said, if you see something, say something. In the case of the United States of America versus Hunter Biden, I see something. It's a double standard, and I'm saying something. If my clients are going to jail, suit Hunter up for a suit, and send him along. You got Proud Boys, you got people on J6 going to jail for participating in a protest. Here you've got a tax scofflaw borrowing money under suspicious circumstances from another lawyer. We don't know where the money came from. And he's getting a break because his daddy's the president.
Same dude that got 50 members of the U.S. intelligence community to sign a letter saying that his lost laptop, which contained pictures of him smoking crack, right, with prostitutes, butt naked, the picture of the gun, with his penis in the background. There's all this stuff out there. This is the same dude that they.
I ain't no president's son.
Clearly, reeked of Russian misinformation. It's wild.
The Creedwater Revival saying we should probably part with that song this afternoon. He is a president's son, and we expect better from the White House. We expect better from the Justice Department. We certainly expect better from the sentencing judge. Don't accept the deal, Judge. Hey, lots and lots of stuff to talk about today. I want to pivot off the Biden thing, but maybe I shouldn't. I see we've got a question from a comment from Severe Conservative. Many J6 cases are symbolic for deterrence against a repeat event, but that precedent did not apply to Hunter and his gun. Yeah, I think Mike just covered that. So let's pivot. Have you followed? This topic has been on my mind for a long time, and I wanted to talk about it. It's a notion that I'm going to call moral exhaustion. And I think it arises primarily, in my mind at least, in consideration of immigration to the United States. I am entirely sympathetic with anybody seeking to come here for a better life. There are parts of the world where the conditions of living are intolerable, and you want to go to where you have an opportunity for yourself and your family. And so as I look at things along the southern border and see migrants streaming across the border, I understand what they want. But candidly, I have a sense of if they want it from me, I'm tired. How much am I supposed to do? How much are any of us supposed to do? And what limits are there to empathy? It's often said if you want to raise funds for starving children in Africa, don't tell people about all the starving people in Africa, because that's abstract. Show them the picture of a starving child, and that propinquity, that nearness to the event, the ability to identify with the child, will inspire a sense of sympathy and action, and you can get what you want as a marketing matter. So a person comes across the border and I see them on the street. Do I want to help them? Yes. When I see 10,000 of them come to the border, do I want to help them? Less so. I feel somewhat exhausted by the prospect of all that need coming to our shores. We saw moral exhaustion in the Mediterranean not long ago, where there was a boat laden with refugees, maybe as many as 1,000. I'm not sure the exact number.
It was
It,
750 in total is what
who
they're estimating now.
who died, I think, right? I think there were more on board. There were survivors,
Oh, yes.
and so the boat wanders into
715, I'm sorry.
the boat wanders into Greek waters, and somebody says, "No, no, Italy, Italy, Italy." The Greek Navy doesn't pull the boat in, doesn't offer assistance. The boat capsizes. Perhaps some say the Greek Navy caused that to happen through some reckless act of its own, and more than 700 people die. These were 700 people looking for a better life in the West, and now the Greek Navy and Greece itself is being criticized for not doing enough, and for mishandling this event. And I don't know that that's a fair criticism. What do we expect of Greece or Italy or Texas or New Mexico when the world comes beating a path to your door? I mean, if you're listening to this, you have commitments today. You have commitments to your family, to your employer, to yourself, and to your community. You have a fixed quantum of energy and time to deal with those. And if you're like the rest of us, you're struggling against a sense of marginal utility, diminishing marginal utility. Every effort that you make to improve your situation leaves you with less effort the next moment to act, and you have to choose on how to invest your energies. When faced with infinite need, there's a sense of overwhelming despair, and you can't respond to every claim for help. And so, at some level, the immigrants who drowned in the Mediterranean were looking to the West to save them. But what obligation do we have to save the world? And I realize how cynical that sounds. And I don't mean it to sound cynical. I think it's realistic. What is the obligation that we have to save the world? And was the Greek Navy responsible for these deaths? Or was this a risk that the immigrants or the migrants took, perhaps under the influence of human traffickers who promised them safety, fed the illusion of a better life elsewhere, and left them to drown in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah, the situation is sick. A lot of attention is being pointed to the traffickers, to the smugglers. I always point out the fact that a black market pops up where there's opportunity. So there's, someone on the other side that is, and these families are paying whatever they can scratch together, in the hopes that they have a shot, right? They're paying to be able to gamble. They're paying for a seat at the table. And
I don't know.
And that's one thing. The other thing I think about is the West's role in creating a destabilized environment in the locations from whence these immigrants come. And it's no secret that Syria, Libya, Pakistan, Egypt, these are all countries that the West has had involvement. Iraq, I mean, the Middle East for the last 20 years, Norm, waging war, fighting proxy wars with other nations. Now we see ourselves in a new front, in a new war, largely driven by the West's desire to put someone else in power. There in Ukraine back in 2014, and to me, the bill is coming due, as they say. You got to pay.
But is it a bill you're prepared to pay? I mean, suppose somebody comes.
I just want to make sure that we frame this properly, because it's who is being asked to pay the bill is the question. It's not It's not the decision makers. It's not those who have invested in creating the destabilized environments, who are into world making and global governance and extending the American empire and promoting democracy abroad and whatever veneer is put atop all of those things. It's those who are taxed for, in and among other things, the perception of security and goodwill from their government. It's us. We're being asked to pay that bill when we have in fact, we have no role in creating the crisis that these people are fleeing.
To me, it's more fundamental. I mean, I live a wonderful life. I'm an old man who my kids are gone. My wife and I have more space than we need in the house. Arguably, we should downsize, but we don't. So what am I going to do if there's a knock at the door one night, and I come to the door, and there's a pleasant young woman and her 3 kids and her husband standing there saying, "Is there room in your house for us? We've come from Guatemala. We've come from Honduras. We've come from Syria. We've come from Iraq." And the answer is there is room in my house, but I don't feel morally obligated to share it. And the fact that I don't feels like selfishness. It feels like it feels like something discreditable. And I think that from on a macro level, when we look at a world of need and we see people fleeing to come to where we are, there is some sense in which I feel we ought to lend them assistance. But there are so many of them, and they keep coming. And my resources, both psychologically, financially, and emotionally, are limited, that moral exhaustion sets in. And you begin to say, look, we can't be the destination nation for the world. We don't lack the resources to care. We lack the resources fundamentally to care for ourselves and our own community. We can't care for the world. What do you do with that, Mike? Because you don't want it to create a politics of resentment, but a politics of resignation is almost as bad. But an irresponsible politics of unrealistic hopes and dreams that can't be fulfilled is worse, in my view. Because what it does is it holds open the door, come on in, and then when there's no room or someone drowns, everybody goes into this moral paroxysm like, well, we failed. Did we? I don't know that.
T-Girl says on Rumble, nice to see you, T. Western leaders.
Yo, what up, T-Girl?
Western leaders will not present a publicly stern face against illegal immigration. Immigrants are given false hope. And I think that's the first part to me answering your question is starting from that baseline. Our government, the United States government at least, and I think this is probably true of most of the Western European governments that make up the EU, these governments are not publicly stating, they are not making it known that these countries, these sovereign territories are not available, right? There's this sort of passive encouragement. And we saw it being used as a tool throughout the Trump presidency. We saw AOC going down to the border and staging photos of her crying at, kids in cages, and then miraculously.
She was crying because the bars weren't open yet. I mean, come on.
Well, miraculously, these threads disappear when the situation is the exact same, but there's a new administration in the White House, right? And one thing that Trump signaled very loudly to the rest of the world was that our southern border was not open, right? And whether the wall was built in full, whether you want to argue over that sort of stupid stuff, that's your prerogative. But the signal was drawn very clearly that our southern border was not open, right? This is on the other side. We're 4 years from that, 5 years, 6 years from that now. Mm-hmm. Where we are now is wholly different. Now we've got Mayor Eric Adams out of New York suspending the 90-day short-term rental, ban, so that migrants can be housed in hotels indefinitely. And this is happening in every major municipality around the country.
People are tired of it. And that moral exhaustion is going to yield resentment or something. And I think we just can't treat the United States as an open free for all and suggest that there's room for the world here. We can't care for our own, much less care for a world of strangers come hustling and bustling across our shores. I don't know. The Greek.
What we can't afford either is to point fingers at each other as citizens and say and pretend that this is not a complicated issue. Because it truly is. It very much is a complicated issue, especially at an interpersonal level, right? When one begins to imagine the situation that you were laying out earlier, right? It's easy to look at it from the macro and just see these things as raw numbers, and then qualitative values around assimilation and what's being brought here in terms of culture and an expectation of government. Is there an appreciation for the individual as the sovereign? Right? How are the voting patterns going to be changed by those who don't have a foundation and understanding the Bill of Rights and the Constitution? That's a legitimate concern. And don't let anybody tell you that it's not a legitimate concern. That's a legitimate concern. This is the United States of America. It is a sovereign territory, and it is built on the belief that the individual is the sovereign, that we are a self-governing republic, right? The question is, if these people that are coming from war-torn countries, from impoverished situations, that are fleeing, looking for a better life, and that's being as charitable as one can be, right? Because that's not always the case. But in mass, the most charitable case is the one that I just made. The question is, how do we best accommodate and still maintain our status as the United States of America, a self-governing republic built on the backs of individuals who see themselves as a sovereign?
And I think that's the fundamental question, and it's one that you raise at your peril, because people will say, "Oh, it's you're ignoring our commitment to the global community, this, that, and everything else." Global, my ass. I mean, you pick up your bed and you walk from your own home or your own hovel into a community to live your life on a day-to-day basis, and this is where we're living our lives right now, with values that we have created, that we can defend against the world. The moral exhaustion problem is one I raise, and I want to return to this theme over and over again, because to me it nails it. I mean, there's that book by Jean Raspail, Camp of the Saints, which was panned as right-wing propaganda and racist, but when it was written in France in the 1970s, but it's become a parable for the world we live in today. There is a world of need. It's at your door. You can respond on an individual basis the first time, maybe the second time, but when the need keeps coming the third, fourth, and fifth time, you've run out of resources, you've run out of heart, but the need's just as great. And now the systems are broken and your way of life is gone. I don't think that's a gamble any of us want to play with. So look, let's pivot real quick. I was hoping we'd cover three things today, but I see we've talked past our sell-by date. We're watching the marine submersible, the Titan. I guess they're going to run out of oxygen tomorrow. They go down 2.5 miles deep into the ocean, and it's an expensive trip. I think it cost about $250,000 per passenger. 4 people were on board to take a look at the Titanic, and then suddenly the submersible disappeared. And it's such a wide and vast underworld, the sea is, that no one knows where to find this thing. You'd think it'd be simple. Drop a coin into the pond and go get it. But now there's some 900 square mile search area, and they're going to run out of oxygen by tomorrow morning. This morning, reports are that there is a sound, ping, 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 being heard every half an hour, suggesting that the occupants of the submersible are still alive and trying to signal a location, but they can't be found yet, and we're running out of time. This brought to mind immediately, for me at least, as a lawyer, the doctrine of assumption of the risk. You're always looking for legal remedies. People went on this trip. Did they not know there was a substantial risk that things could go horribly awry? And now they have. Let's talk more about the common law and about allocation of risk and whatnot.
And then let's also talk about the who was on that vessel as well, or who is on that vessel right now as well. We should pick this up tomorrow. I just wanted to put it on the screen so that we didn't forget about it. But certainly we can move on and get our day started. Severe conservative, I see that comment. It's possible to find.
And, maybe somebody should republish it now. I think Camp of the Saints is a realistic discussion of a world driven by population migration. And it raises questions that if you're in a destination nation, you need to answer. What are you prepared to do to save the world? And what are the limits? You need to have a realistic discussion with your family about that. You need to look in the mirror and have a realistic discussion with yourself. You need to come back to Law and Legitimacy, where we'll have a realistic discussion about it with you.
That's right. We're live every day at 8 a.m., Monday through Friday. Sometimes we're on the weekends, and we always tell you when we are. We do AMAs from time to time. Those are really fun. We have a lot of people on Rumble and YouTube that chime in and ask questions. Those are typically our longest episodes, and I really enjoy those. Those typically go around an hour, and they'd go longer if we let them. So perhaps we're due for another one here in the next week or so, Norm. We should think about that. For everybody watching now, please, if you're on Twitter, go and follow at Pattis Podcast. We are seeing a surge in followers over there, and it's nice to get the engagement and to have that tactile sensation of some effort being returned on this side. We enjoy that. We also enjoy being able to engage with you off stream. So we routinely are having conversations with partial conversations, just comment exchanges with some of the regulars here on the live streams. So do that for us. And as well, if you're not able to catch us live every day, if you're subscribed, but for whatever reason, you're in between or you're in the car, you can find these episodes almost immediately after we're done streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, etc. If you're over there, please leave us 5 stars. And if you don't care for us, just leave us alone. Don't give us a look.
Yeah. Or stop sending me hate mail, will you? So I'm getting hate mail lately. I see you're representing another right-wing crazy. No, I'm representing another person whose point of view regards you as a left-wing lunatic. Deal with it, folks.
That's right. That's right. Norm, always glad to see you and glad you're back in DC, even though it gives you a little bit of PTSD. But looking forward to streaming live from the swamp for the remainder of the week.
All right. See you tomorrow, folks.
See you tomorrow, Norm.
Yep, Mike. Be well.